Dust still clung thick to Samuel Whitaker's coat as he urged his silver-gray horse into Silver Wader Creek, Montana, one late summer afternoon of 1878. For more than 3 days, he had survived on jerky and hardtack, food that left his stomach growling and his throat dry as desert sand. Every breath carried the burnt tang of mountain wind, while the hollow clop of hooves against the wooden street gave Samuel a sense of both familiarity and distance. He had ridden across much of the West, but no two towns were ever the same. This one, too, held its own promise. The last time he'd passed through Silver Wader Creek, it had been little more than a trading shack with a sagging saloon. Now the main street showed rows of neat wooden buildings, fresh roofs catching light. He spotted a small newspaper office, a blacksmith shop, a modest hotel with glass windows, a luxury for this frontier. Laughter spilled from the saloon at the far end, while the scent of horseflesh and the ring of hammer on iron carried the rhythm of life. He stopped at the livery. 6'2", he swung down, boots stirring fine dust. The stable boy's curious eyes lingered on the Winchester snug in its leather scabbard. Samuel only gave a small nod, left a coin, and told the boy to mind Thunder, the horse that had carried him through mile after mile. Back on the street, Samuel felt the weight of every mile on his shoulders, every crease at the corner of his eyes, marks of a dozen years without a home to rest in. Then the smell caught him. It wasn't whiskey, nor the musk of hay. It was the warm, thick sweetness of bread fresh from the oven. His stomach growled louder than it had on the trail. Drawn by the scent, his steps carried him to a small shop with a hand-painted sign, Prescott's Bakery. A bell chimed as he pushed through the door. The sight held him still. Afternoon light spilled across the room, mingling with the red glow of a brick oven at the back. Wooden shelves stacked with golden-brown loaves filled the air, with a fragrance that made a man forget his weariness. A glass case showed sugared rolls and cinnamon twists. But Samuel's gaze didn't linger there. It fixed on the woman behind the counter. He did not yet know her name was Hannah Prescott. She brushed flour from work-roughened hands, skin the warm hue of honey under firelight. Her hair, wavy and dark, was tied back, though a few strands framed her face. Her amber eyes carried both strength and calm. Not the painted beauty of city girls, nor the gaudy charm of saloon dancers. Hers was the kind forged by labor and resolve. Samuel realized he was standing there, hat still on his head. He removed it quickly, dipped a nod. Her voice was clear, steady, leaving no room for pretense. "Can I help you?" He cleared his throat, suddenly aware of the trail dust on his clothes. "Miss, the smell of your bread near made me forget how to speak." Her lips curved in a small smile, and the sternness in her eyes softened. "Sourdough, just out of the oven. Want to try a loaf?" He nodded, watching her lift a hot loaf and set it on brown paper. Her hands bore faint scars of burns, not flaws, but testament to work. "1 loaf, 15 cents, she said, sliding it across. Samuel pulled a worn wallet, placed down a silver dollar. As he handed it over, his fingertip brushed hers. A fleeting touch, yet the air seemed to thicken around it. Hannah hesitated a heartbeat, eyes widening just slightly, before pulling her hand back. He masked the moment with a smile. "Keep the change. That bread's worth more than coin." Her brows arched, cautious, though she did not refuse. "I'm Hannah Prescott. If you stay in town, you'll hear the name often enough." He dipped his head slowly. Samuel Whitaker. Just a drifter, passing through, or maybe staying on a while. Their eyes met once more. Curiosity, surprise, and a spark neither cared to name. Samuel left, but only a few steps down the street he tore off a piece of the loaf. The tang of sour, the crunch of crust, the soft heart of it all but stopped him where he stood. For the first time in months, he tasted something that felt like home. Opening his eyes, he turned back, gaze lingering on the bakery door, the image of the woman with amber eyes still etched sharp in his mind. He knew one thing. Tomorrow, and perhaps many days after, he'd find reason enough to return. Sunset laid its glow across the main street of Silver Waiter Creek as Samuel Whitaker stood hesitating outside the small hotel with polished glass windows. Days on the trail and weeks of dried meat had left him hungry for a real meal. Yet it wasn't hunger that pressed him forward. It was the silent promise carried in Hannah Prescott's eyes that afternoon, when he'd placed a silver dollar on her counter and caught a glance that lingered just long enough to give him courage to ask her to supper. He had known women in other towns, mostly saloon girls, quick with a smile, quicker to be forgotten. But Hannah was different. She unsettled him as if he were facing a fight, equal parts eager and afraid of failing. Inside the hotel's dining room, he paused. Oil lamps glowed, white cloths covered the tables, and jars of wildflowers stood in the center. It was nothing like the rowdy saloon with whiskey smoke and fiddle noise. Here the air carried roasted meat, bread, and light ale, a warmth that felt close to peace. By the window, Hannah waited. Samuel almost did not recognize her at first. That afternoon she had been dusted with flour, hair tied back against the heat of the oven. Now she wore a simple blue dress that caught the lamplight and set off the soft curves of her frame. Her dark curls fell loose enough to graze her neck, her skin glowing warm beneath the flame. His chest felt tighter than it should. He had never seen something so plain and yet so striking. "Hannah," he said, voice rough, awkward as he removed his hat. You look beautiful." Her smile curved, half gratitude, half teasing. "And you look better without the trail dust." He laughed, tugging at the one clean shirt he owned. Sitting opposite her, he tried to steady himself, though his hand on the table trembled faintly. The server brought 2 mugs of golden beer. They ordered simply, roast beef for him, stewed chicken with vegetables for her. When the server left, silence dropped between them. Samuel couldn't bear it. "I have to admit something. That talk about a cattle drive this afternoon, it wasn't true. There's no hungry crew waiting for bread." Hannah tilted her head, eyes glinting as if she had known all along. "So that's why you bought up all those loaves?" He chuckled, surrendering to his clumsiness. "Truth is, I just needed an excuse to see you again." Their eyes held. Hannah did not look away. She only smiled, soft and searching, as though weighing her answer. Samuel felt his pulse drum hard, fingers tightening on the edge of the cloth. "I suppose," she murmured, eyes glowing under the lamplight, "that's a rather costly way to make an acquaintance." "Maybe so, but worth every cent," he answered, voice low. The air between them thickened until the rattle of cutlery from other tables reminded them they were not alone. When their meals arrived, Samuel leaned into stories of the trail, sunrises over endless prairie, rivers swollen with spring, the time a steer near crushed his leg. He did not tell them to impress her, only to fill the space, yet he found himself smiling wider each time her eyes brightened. "And you?" he asked, bracing his arm on the table. "How does a woman come to run a bakery in a frontier town?" Hannah set her spoon down, leaning forward slightly. Her voice was calm, edged with pride. "I came here with my brother after our parents passed. He believed there was silver in the northern hills. I knew only that I did not want to go back east to a life of sameness. I started with loaves for the miners, saved what I could until the shop stood on its own. It wasn't easy. Few believed a woman, let alone a black woman, could last. But I am still here." Samuel said nothing for a long breath. His gaze held no pity, only respect. "You're strong. I've ridden far and met many, but not many hold their ground the way you do." Her eyes locked on his. "I had no other choice but to be strong." Something shifted deep inside him then. He had lived years without ties, proud of his wandering freedom. Yet across from him sat a woman who bore her burdens without flinching, who built something lasting from almost nothing. He meant to speak, but the words caught. Instead, he watched the way her hand lifted the mug to her lips, the way her laughter slipped out when she caught him fumbling. "You don't need to be so tense, Samuel," she teased lightly. "I'm just a baker." "No, you're not just a baker," he said before he could stop himself. Her smile softened, head dipping slightly, and for once he did not mind being clumsy. Her look told him it hadn't been wrong. They ate slowly, each story another step closer. Their glances lingered too long, their hands brushed too near. Nothing loud, yet everything felt like two rivers bending toward one course. By the time the server cleared their plates, Samuel was startled to see the hour had slipped toward 10. Time had vanished. Rising, he offered his arm. "May I walk you home?" Hannah nodded. Her hand rested against his sleeve, warmth seeping through the fabric. Outside, the street lay hushed, lamps burning low. But for Samuel, the night had never been brighter. He had found a reason to remain, longer than one passing day. Night in Silver Waiter Creek ended with the steady rhythm of hooves along the dusty street. When Hannah returned to the small house behind her bakery, her heart still stirred. The stranger cowboy, with gray eyes carrying sorrow and a clumsy way of speaking, had awoken in her a feeling she could not yet name. Samuel, riding back toward the rented stable on the north edge of town, felt no different. He had planned to stay only one night, then ride on with the next herd bound for Montana. But the thought of Hannah's hesitant smile behind the counter, flour-dusted fingers brushing his hand, pulled tight at his chest. The next morning, before the sun had dried the dew on the fields, Samuel rode back down the main street. Hannah was opening her shop, the brick oven already glowing hot. She looked up, surprised to see his tall frame dismounting outside. "You haven't gone with the herd?" she asked, brushing flour from her apron. Samuel's rugged face softened into a faint smile. "Hannah, there never was a herd waiting. Last night I realized, the only reason I'd want to stay in Silver Waiter Creek is you." Her hands stilled, eyes locking on his. The raw honesty in his voice left no room to turn away. Her heart thudded, caught between shock and something tender. She had heard promises before, but his gaze did not beg pity. It only sought nearness. She lowered her head slightly, hiding the smile that rose unbidden. "If that's so, then you'd better find yourself a good reason to stay." Samuel said nothing, only reached into his saddlebag and drew out a small bundle of wildflowers, tied with a rough twine. purple and yellow, still jeweled with morning dew. His voice was low, almost unsteady. "This is the reason I found today." Hannah's eyes glistened. How long had it been since anyone brought her flowers? Sometimes the simplest gestures could break through more deeply than any fine words. That day, Samuel did more than bring blossoms. He stepped inside, shrugged off his coat, and rolled up his sleeves. Hannah tried to protest, but he insisted. "You've given me bread, given me a place to stop. Let me at least carry the flower with you." Through the morning, townsfolk passing by could not help but notice the tall cowboy hauling heavy sacks beside the slender baker. At times, when they lifted hot trays from the oven together, their hands brushed and lingered. Hannah startled but did not pull away. Samuel did not move either. Their eyes held, silent, carrying what words could not. Once, when their shoulders bumped while hefting a sack, Hannah broke into laughter. The sound drew a smile from Samuel, easing them both as if they had known each other for years. Yet in a small town, nothing went unseen. Women sewing on porches whispered, "Look there, that colored baker growing close to the drifter. He's got no kin here. Who knows where he came from?" The murmurs trailed Hannah, wherever she went, heavy at times. But when she turned and saw Samuel, sweat damp on his brow, hands dusted in flour, his steady eyes holding hers as if to shield her from it all, her heart quieted. By late afternoon, with customers gone, Samuel was still there, wiping the counter with clumsy care. Hannah sat watching, a smile tugging at her lips. In that moment she understood. He truly wished to stay. Not for the bread, nor the town, but for her. And so, in a place bound by prejudice, a drifter cowboy and a black baker began the first page of their story. Not with grand vows, but with flour on their hands, glances that lingered too long, and a simple bundle of wildflowers. Morning light poured gold over the rooftops of Silver Wader Creek, turning the main street into something that looked brushed with honey. Samuel Whitaker had been up before dawn, tightening the cinch on his saddle, packing a checkered cloth, a few small knives, and a bottle of apple cider he'd bought at the general store. He wasn't used to the notion of a picnic, but Hannah's words from last night played in his head like a refrain. She had looked up from her counter, eyes bright, and asked softly, "Tomorrow, would you like to go down to the creek with me?" He had agreed without thought. Now, standing outside her bakery, his heart thumped like he was riding into battle. Hannah appeared with a wicker basket in her arms. She wore a cream cotton dress, plain but touched with neat pleats and a lace trim that gave her a quiet radiance. Her dark curls were loose for once, a few strands spilling on her shoulders and catching the sun. When she smiled, Samuel felt as though the little town had shrunk down to nothing. Only her and that light remained. "I've brought bread, cheese, and a few apples," she said, lifting the basket. "I hope you don't mind a simple meal." Samuel tipped his hat, grinning. "After a month on jerky, I'd call that a feast." They rode out together, the trail dipping into a green valley. Silver Creek wound through willows, its water clear enough to see stones glittering beneath. The soft rush of water mixed with birdsong, and cool mountain air carried the scent of wet grass. On the bank, Samuel spread the cloth while Hannah laid out bread slices, golden cheese, and red apples. They sat across from each other, the sound of water and the hush of morning wrapping around them. "I've never done this before," Samuel admitted, breaking bread in his hands. Hannah raised a brow. "What do you mean?" "I mean sitting down to eat in peace." On the trail, meals are rushed by firelight, eyes always on the herd, or in a saloon, with noise and fights around you. To sit beside a woman, like this, in a place like this. He shook his head, gaze settling on the creek. It feels strange. For a moment, Hannah was quiet. Then she spoke, voice softened with something wistful. I hadn't known mornings like this either before I came here. I've had to fight hard. Back east, no one believed a black woman could own a shop, let alone live by her own hand. When my parents died, my brother chased silver in the hills. I turned to bread. At least flour and fire are steadier than people. Samuel looked at her then, gray eyes glinting with respect. You built it all with your own hands. Her shoulders lifted, but he saw the faint blush at her cheeks. I only did what I had to. No one gave me anything, so I had to bake it for myself. They both laughed softly at the unintended jest. The sound drifted over the water, fading into a deeper silence. They ate slowly, passing slices of apple and cheese. When Samuel handed her a piece of bread, his fingers brushed hers. The moment snagged between them. Hannah didn't pull away, her amber eyes meeting his as though searching. Samuel swallowed hard, fumbling for words, but his chest stirred with a confusion he had never known. A breeze tugged a curl loose against Hannah's cheek. She lowered her head to move it, but Samuel reached first. His calloused fingers grazed her skin as he pushed the strand back, clumsy but reverent, like touching something fragile and rare. Hannah froze, eyes wide, breath quickened. For a heartbeat, the world stilled. He drew his hand back, though his gaze never left hers. One step closer, and they might have leaned together. The air between them felt drawn tight, a wire ready to snap. Hannah smiled then, trembling at the edges. You're bold, Cowboy. His voice came low. If I weren't, I'd never still be here. The moment passed, yet its echo clung to them. They sat longer, every glance weighted, every motion charged. It felt as though a single spark could set the whole world aflame. When the sun tilted west, they packed the basket and rode back. Samuel rode close by her side, but in his mind replayed the memory of his fingers against her cheek, the way her eyes had widened, the hush between them. He had not kissed her. They had not crossed that line. But the air had burned with promise, and Samuel knew this was only the beginning. The main street of Whitaker Creek lay hushed beneath the moon, its pale light spilling across two figures walking side by side. After their day by the creek, Samuel Whitaker could not bring himself to let the evening end too soon. He had offered to walk Hannah Prescott home, and she had only nodded. Now the town was still, save for the whisper of wind in the trees and the silver wash of night across their shoulders. Her small wooden house sat at the eastern edge of town, a low pine fence marking a narrow garden where wildflowers trembled in the dew. At the gate, Samuel removed his hat, standing awkwardly, unsure where to put his hands. His heart beat faster than it ever had in a stampede or a saloon standoff. Hannah turned, leaning lightly against the fence. Moonlight lit her face, setting her amber eyes aglow. The cream dress she wore shone against her dark skin, making her seem both near and untouchable. "Thank you for walking me," she said softly, her voice low yet clear in the stillness. Samuel nodded, swallowing hard. Words circled inside him, how he didn't want the night to end, how she felt like the meaning of home, how he had never needed anyone like this. but nothing passed his lips. The space between them was only a step. He drew a breath, hesitating. He feared breaking what was still fragile. But then Hannah lifted her gaze. Their eyes met, and Samuel saw himself mirrored there. Longing, confusion, but no more desire to hide. He moved half a step closer, raising his hand, pausing just beside her cheek. She did not pull away. She waited, breath shallow, lips parted as though listening for an answer he hadn't yet spoken. There were no words, only the moment he bent and touched his mouth to hers. Gentle, hesitant, a kiss that asked, "May I?" Hannah's reply came in silence. Her hand pressed against his chest, feeling the wild hammer of his heart. Samuel, lost in the warmth of her lips, felt years of solitude break open. Countless nights beneath the stars, firelight for company. Every mile of loneliness dissolved into this single touch. The kiss lingered, deepening slowly, as if they were learning each other through breath and closeness. When they finally parted, both drew ragged breaths, yet neither looked away. Samuel let out a short laugh, rough and unsteady. "I don't know what I just did, but I don't regret it." Hannah's smile curved faintly, though her eyes shimmered with doubt. "Men like you don't stay, Samuel. Not for long." The words cut, because they were half true. He had never stayed anywhere. But as he looked at her house, at the glow of the lamp inside, and still tasted her sweetness on his lips, he knew he wanted no more departures. "Not this time," he said firmly. "I've ridden long enough. Silver Wader Creek has everything I need." Hannah studied him, torn between belief and caution. Trust did not come easily. Samuel understood. He didn't ask for it, outright. Instead, he reached for her hand resting on the fence, squeezing gently. "I won't promise much, but I know if I wake tomorrow without the smell of your bread in the air, I'll have no reason left to stay." Her smile curved bittersweet. "Then let's hope bread is strong enough to keep a cowboy." They lingered in silence, hands touching, the night full of cricket song and whispering grass. At last Samuel replaced his hat and stepped back, though his eyes never left her until she slipped inside. A faint glow from the oil lamp behind her window told him she was still there. Walking back toward the livery, Samuel felt both lighter and heavier. Lighter for the release of what had been building. Heavier because now he understood. This was no passing encounter. This was a choice, and he had chosen to stay. Samuel Whitaker, once sworn to a life on horseback, had found a home in a woman's smile and kiss. But inside her small room, Hannah sat by the window in moonlight, wondering still, would a restless man tire of such quiet one day and ride away? The question lingered in the night without answer. Yet the taste of that first kiss remained, enough to draw a quiet smile to her lips. Dusk had settled when Samuel Whitaker rapped softly on Hannah Prescott's wooden door. He heard her steps within, and then the door swung open to a sight that stole his breath. She wore a wine-colored cotton dress, plain but cut in a way that followed her form with natural grace. Her curls fell loose against her shoulders, and the glow of the oil lamp behind her framed her in a gentle halo. "You came," she said with a smile, her voice low and warm. Samuel only nodded, removing his hat, trying to hide the thrum in his chest. He had ridden into storms and stared down drunk men with guns, yet never had he felt such nerves as he did tonight. Inside, her home carried a simple comfort. Fire snapped in the hearth. The scent of stew mingled with the warmth of fresh bread. On the small table waited 2 bowls, a basket of loaves, and a bottle of cider. It wasn't fancy, but Samuel felt as though he had stepped into another world, one that whispered of belonging, of home. They ate together, their voices low. Hannah spoke of her bakery, of the customers who filled her mornings with chatter. Samuel shared scraps of his wandering life, being thrown into the mud by a horse, shivering under the stars with no fire but the sky. Their laughter filled the little house, making it seem larger than its walls. Their eyes kept finding each other, sometimes steady, sometimes darting away, but always returning. When his fingers brushed hers as he passed her a bowl, neither pulled back right away. The pause lingered. After the meal, Samuel sat still, unwilling to see the evening end. When Hannah began clearing the table, he rose to help. Their hands met over a cloth, and his palm settled over hers. She looked up, her amber gaze locking onto his gray one. He didn't release her hand. Instead, he squeezed gently, a wordless question. Hannah hesitated, then let her hand rest within his, small and steady. The silence stretched. Their breaths mingled, close enough that he felt the beat of her heart through the space between them. With his free hand, he touched her cheek, rough fingers grazing soft skin. "Hannah," he whispered, voice thick. She gave no reply, only a slight nod, an invitation that needed no words. He bent to her, their lips meeting in a kiss that began tender, tentative, yet held the weight of a storm. Hannah yielded, then answered, her lips trembling at first, then surer, fiercer. Her hands slid around his neck, drawing him closer, as though she feared even a breath of distance. They broke only to breathe, only to find each other again. Kiss after kiss grew from gentle to hungry, from longing to fire. Breathless, they clung to each other until the room itself seemed to fade. Samuel lifted her in his arms, strong hands holding her as if she weighed no more than a promise. She leaned into him, face pressed against his chest, her breath unsteady. Step by step, he carried her into the small bedroom, the lamp casting wavering shadows on the walls. That night held no haste, no roughness, only tender touches, drawn-out kisses, and trembling breaths. Samuel traced her as if to memorize her, reverent in every movement. Hannah answered with trust, letting down the armor she had carried for so long. In his arms, she was not the woman fighting prejudice, not the baker carrying a shop alone. She was simply Hannah, someone to cherish. In her embrace, he was not the drifter, not the man bound to the saddle and the open road. He became a man who had found a harbor, a place to belong. Later, with night deep outside, they lay side by side, fingers still entwined, their breathing calm again. Samuel brushed a curl from her brow, watching the faint smile that lingered even in her sleep. He whispered into the darkness, though she did not stir. "I won't ride away again. I've found where I belong." The town of Silver Waiter Creek slept in silence, but in that small house, 2 souls had found each other, no longer strangers, but halves of a whole. It was no longer the cautious steps of courtship. It was the turning point, where a kiss became a night of closeness, where 2 solitary hearts bound themselves together. And from that night forward, neither would turn away. The sun climbed over the western ridge, spilling gold across the wooden streets of Silver Wader Creek. As Hannah Prescott opened her bakery door, the bell chimed as always, yet something was wrong. The usual hum of voices was missing. No line of townsfolk waited for loaves warm from the oven. No children lingered for sweet rolls. No housewives chatted in the early light. Her sourdough sat golden on the counter, neat and ready, but the shop was quiet. Too quiet. By midday, word spread clear. A new bakery had opened at the far end of Main Street, run by a family out of Helena. Their bread sold cheaper, sweet cakes thrown in for free. In a town where pennies mattered, few turned down a bargain. That morning, Hannah sold only a handful of loaves, so little it knotted her stomach. She sat behind the counter, hands dusted in flour, but her heart heavy. Every loaf was more than bread. It was proof that a black woman could build and hold her place in a land that gave nothing freely. When afternoon came, the door opened, and Samuel Whitaker stepped in, the scent of horse and sweat drifting in with him. Fresh back from work at the Hartwell Ranch, he saw at once what was wrong. The shelves still stood full. "What happened, Hannah?" he asked, voice low, eyes scanning the room. She lifted her head, steady but shadowed with sorrow. "A new shop opened. They sell cheaper. Folks have gone there." Samuel's jaw tightened. He moved closer, fists clenched. Never had he seen her falter. But now her shoulders trembled beneath her flour-streaked apron. He wanted to act, to do anything to shield her. "Let me help," he said without pause. "I can talk to them, or find a way." "No!" Hannah's voice cut sharp, firm. "You don't understand. This is my shop, built with my hands. If you step in now, people will say I've lasted only because of a man." Samuel froze. She was right. In a town steeped in prejudice, it was already bold for a black woman to run a bakery. If his shadow fell across her counter, all she had built could be dismissed as borrowed strength. "Hannah, I only want to help," he said gently, his voice softening. "I can't just watch you wear yourself down." She turned, wiping her hands against her apron, gathering herself. "And I can't let them think I can't stand alone. If I fall, it will be on my own terms, after I've fought with everything I have." In that moment, Samuel felt two fears collide. His fear of watching her break under the weight of the fight, and her fear of losing dignity if anyone thought she leaned on him. Evening settled. They sat together at the table, loaves unsold around them. Hannah looked weary, yet her eyes still burned with fire. Samuel said nothing. He only set his hand atop hers. Two wills, fierce and unyielding, met in that silence. No words were needed. Beneath the strain, faith remained, faith that neither would turn away when storms came. Outside, the wind swept down the empty street. Silver Wader Creek seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see how this quiet battle would end. Summer night settled over Silver Wader Creek, moonlight silvering the rooftops. The only sounds the low whistle of wind through shutters and the hum of crickets in the grass. Behind the bakery, in her small house, Hannah Prescott lay restless after a long day of unsold loaves. Samuel Whitaker had not yet slept. He sat by the window, an unlit cigarette between his fingers, eyes fixed on the dark street, his thoughts weighed down by Hannah's burdens. At first the smell was faint, sharp and smoky. Samuel thought he imagined it. But moments later, he saw the haze of gray rising at the back, his chest clenched, Horses in the livery screamed, hooves striking wood. "Hannah!" Samuel roared, rushing for the door. She jolted awake as the sting of smoke burned her lungs. By the time she reached the porch, flames had already caught the rear storage room, fire leaping along dry timber, painting the sky in violent orange. "No!" Hannah cried, and before Samuel could stop her, she darted into the blaze. He barely caught the hem of her dress as she vanished. "Hannah, don't!" Inside, the heat pressed like a furnace, smoke blinding and thick. Hannah shielded her mouth with her sleeve, stumbling toward the shelf where a clay jar sat. The starter, the sourdough mother her grandmother had carried from San Francisco, the living heart of her bakery. Without it, she was nothing. Samuel burst in behind her, eyes burning, lungs raw. He saw her collapse to her knees, coughing, clutching the jar to her chest as though it were her last breath. He didn't think, only wrapped his arms around her, lifting her against him. "Drop it!" he shouted over the roar. But she shook her head, eyes fierce with despair. Weakened, she still clung tight. Samuel gathered her and the jar both, shielding her with his own body as sparks rained down. He barreled through the room, kicked the back door wide, and they tumbled into the yard just as beams crashed inside with a deafening crack. Cool air hit his face, though his lungs still burned. Hannah coughed hard, face pale, the clay jar pressed against her. Samuel fell to his knees, pulling her into his arms. "God, Hannah, I almost lost you." His voice broke, his hand trembling in her hair. Through tears and smoke, she whispered hoarse, "Samuel, I couldn't let it burn. It's all I have." His chest tightened. He pulled her closer, laying a broad hand over her heart. "No, Hannah. What you have is here. You're alive. You still have us." Her sobs came then, raw, her tears mixing with ash. Behind them the fire raged, townsfolk shouting, rushing with buckets. Yet in that moment, there was only the two of them. She buried her face against his chest, listening to the thunder of his heartbeat, the heat of his breath. For the first time in years, she let herself yield, let herself be held. "We'll lose everything," she choked. Samuel tilted her chin until her smoke-reddened eyes met his. "No." His voice cut through the roar. "We'll build it again. From nothing if we must. From the ashes." The words landed like a vow. Hannah stared at him, long and searching, then gave a slow nod. Firelight reflected in her amber eyes, fragile yet unbroken. Samuel held her tighter, as though he could anchor their whole world in his arms. In the blaze behind them, their shop burned. But amid the ruin, they found what mattered more. They still had each other. Morning broke over Silver Waiter Creek, with the smell of char still heavy in the air. The Prescott bakery stood blackened, its back roof collapsed, walls leaning, the ground littered with ash. Hannah Prescott stood silent before it all. The clay jar clutched tight in her arms. The sourdough starter, her grandmother's gift from San Francisco, the soul of her bread. It had survived. But her eyes blurred as she looked at the ruin of her life's work. Samuel wrapped an arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. He said nothing. His presence was the promise. Then came the wonder of a small town. Neighbors trickled in, each with what they could spare. The lumberman brought fresh planks. Mrs. Wilson from the southern ranch sent a sack of flour. Children rushed about with shovels, laughing as they scooped ash, turning labor into play. Reverend Thompson came to pray, then rolled up his sleeves to haul timbers. "Hannah, you won't stand alone," one housewife said, broom in hand. Hannah bit her lip as tears slid free. For the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider. For the first time, she belonged. Samuel became the backbone of the rebuild. From dawn until dusk, he swung hammers, drove nails, raised beams. His shirt stayed soaked with sweat, his hands blistered and raw. A man who once lived by saddle and gun now built with saw and nail. He never complained, never slowed, as though the strength of the whole town rested on his shoulders. Hannah worked too, kneading dough in a makeshift oven set up outside, sending warm loaves to those who helped. It was the only gift she could give, the bread of her hands. One afternoon, Samuel came in with flour coating his hair and face, his clumsy attempt at kneading leaving a cloud across the kitchen. Hannah laughed, her laughter bright and full, echoing off the charred walls. "You look like you rolled through a flour sack," she teased, brushing his cheek with her hand. Samuel smiled, then caught her hand and held it still, his eyes steady. "I want you to get used to this, Hannah. Not just the trail-worn drifter. I want to be the man who stands beside you, even with flour on my face and ash on my shirt." Her amber gaze softened, caught between humor and warmth. In that moment she knew love was not found only in romance by moonlight, but in blistered hands and clumsy dough, in choosing each other through sweat and dust. Day by day, the bakery rose again. A new roof went up, sturdier beams set in place. The oven bricks were stacked fresh, carried one by Samuel and other men, while Hannah polished the scorched pans that had survived. Each night they sat together, exhausted but content. Hannah leaned into his shoulder, listening to the steady beat of his heart. For the first time, hardship no longer felt like something to fear. "Samuel," she whispered, "all my life I thought strength meant standing alone. But now I see, letting someone stand beside me isn't weakness. It's another kind of strength." He drew her close, his voice rough and certain. "And I thought freedom meant never belonging. But you've shown me. Belonging is what I've been searching for all along." The bakery was reborn not only from timber and flour, but from shared glances in the dust, from laughter in the toil, from the unspoken vow that they would never stand alone again. When the doors reopened on a crisp autumn morning, the bell above the frame rang out into the new light. The shelves were not yet full, but Hannah's heart was. Beside her, Samuel wiped sweat from his brow, his gray eyes bright with pride. Through hardship, their love had not only been tested, but forged stronger, like the new beams holding the walls upright. They looked at each other and smiled. Whatever came next, they would face it together. That evening, the sun laid a honeyed glow across Silver Whitaker Creek, painting the main street in rare, gentle light. Scars of the fire lingered still, the blackened marks on timber walls, the faint sting of ash in the air. But the Prescott bakery stood open once more. Fresh loaves filled the air with their warm scent, drifting down the street like a promise of beginnings reborn. Hannah Prescott stood at the doorway, flour on her apron as always, but in her eyes a quiet peace flickered. Townsfolk came and went, buying bread not only for taste but out of gratitude, for they had helped raise the shop back from ruin. When the last customer left, she sank onto a wooden chair on the porch, massaging her roughened hands. She was tired, yet her heart brimmed fuller than ever before. Samuel Whitaker came from behind, sleeves rolled, streaks of soot still clinging faintly to his shirt cuffs. He said nothing, only sat beside her. Silence stretched, filled only by the wind through the eaves and children's laughter echoing down the street. "Tired?" his voice asked, low and warm. Hannah smiled faintly. "Yes, but I've never felt more alive." Samuel nodded, his gaze on the bakery, the place they had rebuilt together, beam by beam, loaf by loaf. For weeks now, one thought had burned inside him. He didn't want this to be passing. He wanted it to be forever. He rose, disappeared inside, then returned with something hidden in his hand. Hannah watched, puzzled, as he stepped to the doorway where the sunset poured over him, casting his frame in gold. He turned, eyes fixed on hers. The wanderer's hesitation was gone. What she saw now was resolve, steady and unyielding. Slowly, Samuel drew from his pocket a small wooden box, worn and scarred with age, yet precious in his hands. He opened it to reveal a plain gold ring, its surface gleaming in the fading light. Hannah gasped, hand flying to her mouth. Her breath caught. Samuel sank to one knee on the wooden step, the very place that had seen their labor, their sweat, their tears. His voice came slow, sure, colored with the tremor of feeling. "Hannah Prescott, from the first day I walked into your shop, it wasn't the bread that held me. It was you. You showed me freedom isn't riding forever. It's finding a place for my heart to rest." His eyes glistened, fierce with certainty. "I want that place to be you. I want my home to be where you stand, where you laugh, where you bake bread and scold me for my clumsy hands. Hannah, will you marry me?" Her tears spilled freely. Years of fighting against suspicion, of stoking the oven alone through the night, of carrying herself through doubt and scorn, all of it rushed back. And now, here knelt the man who offered not just love, but a life shared in all its trials and joys. Her voice trembled, yet rang clear as she stepped forward. "Yes, yes, Samuel, I will." Relief swept over him. His shoulders loosened as though he had carried this vow too long. Carefully, he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit snug, the gold gleaming as though made for her alone. Hannah's hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of joy. For the first time, she knew she was not alone. Samuel rose, gathering her into his arms. In the golden wash of sunset, they held each other close. Hannah buried her face against his chest, listening to his heart drum like a steady hymn. Samuel pressed a kiss to her hair and whispered, "Just for her. From now on, we are not only bound by love, we are a family." Passers-by paused. Reverend Thompson smiled. Mrs. Wilson dabbed her eyes. Children giggled and cheered. The whisper spread fast. "Samuel Whitaker has proposed to Hannah Prescott." But for them, the world narrowed to the porch where he had knelt, where her tears and his vow mingled with the scent of bread and the memory of flame. The sun slid behind the ridge, sky burning red. On Hannah's hand, the plain ring caught the last light, modest yet carrying the full heart of the man who had chosen to stay. In that quiet dusk, Hannah squeezed Samuel's hand. Whatever trials lay ahead, they would face them together. The bakery was no longer only a place of work. It had become the mark of their love, their resilience, their strength. And there, on its wooden threshold, Silver Wader Creek bore witness to the beginning of something greater than survival, the beginning of a family, the beginning of a love etched into every beam, every loaf, every ember still glowing in their hearts. Autumn came, laying a golden cloak of fallen leaves across the wooden streets of Silver Wader Creek. The air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of ripened grain from far-off fields, a quiet promise of plenty. And in that season, the day long awaited by Hannah Prescott and Samuel Whitaker finally arrived. They chose no grand church, nor called upon the town's powerful. Their wedding was held in the bakery itself, once burned to the ground, now rebuilt with sweat, tears, and love. Pale wooden walls shone new, the oven stood steady again, and a long table was set with plain white cloth. Upon it lay golden loaves and wildflowers, proof that joy could be born from humble things. The guests were no strangers. They were the very townsfolk who had lifted hammers and hauled timber after the fire. Mrs. Wilson sat in the front row, eyes wet but smiling. Reverend Thompson stood tall, voice ready to bless. The children, those same little ones who once shoveled ash with glee, now darted about, eager for a glimpse of the moment. The door opened, and Samuel stepped forward. He wore a clean white shirt, a brown vest, his stride marked by the faint limp left from an old ranch injury. Yet no one saw weakness. In every step was pride, as though all his wandering had led him to this one place. His eyes burned with steady light, fixed only on the far end of the room, where Hannah waited. And then she appeared. Her dress was simple cotton, no lace or silk, only a thin veil draped over her dark, curling hair. But her simplicity made her shine all the more. Her smile lit the room, and in her hands was no ornate bouquet, only wildflowers gathered from the meadow beyond town. Purple, yellow, white. Samuel swallowed hard as she drew near. He remembered the first time he'd seen her. Flower on her hands, amber eyes bright behind the counter. She was still that woman, but now she was more. The wife he was about to claim with every vow in him. Reverend Thompson began in a voice warm and sure. We do not stand today in some grand church, but in a place holier still. This bakery, where love was needed, tested by fire, and rose again like bread in the oven. Gentle laughter rippled through the crowd. Hannah's eyes brimmed as she looked at Samuel. When it came time for vows, Samuel drew a deep breath, gripping her hand tight. His voice was rough but rang clear. Hannah Prescott, I rode into Silver Wader Creek looking only for bread, but I found you. A strong, proud woman who taught me what it means to belong, to have a home. I vow from this day until the end, whether limping or weary, I will stand by you, protect you, and bake with you 1,000 loaves of life. Murmurs of awe drifted through the room. Hannah laughed through her tears, then spoke her vow. Samuel Whitaker, you did not come into my life as a customer, but as a wind I never expected, bringing warmth I once thought I did not deserve. I vow to share with you every batch of dough, every hardship, every small joy. And when trials come, I will not fear, because I know you'll be there. Samuel shut his eyes a moment, letting every word sink into his chest. And when Reverend Thompson declared, by the witness of this town, I pronounce you husband and wife, the hall burst in applause. Samuel bent to kiss Hannah. It was not the fierce kiss of first passion, but one of calm certainty, a vow sealed. Hannah trembled, but in his arms she felt wholly claimed, wholly safe. The feast began right there. Bread, apple pie, sweet cider passed from hand to hand. The townsfolk laughed, raised cups, children ran circles, shrieking with joy. Hannah cast off her veil, rolled up her sleeves, and served her guests with her own hands. Samuel followed close, steadying her when she stumbled. In the smallest gestures lived their truest happiness. As the sun sank, light red as fire spilled through the windows. The bakery still rang with laughter, but Hannah and Samuel sat side by side, watching in quiet. Samuel bent close and whispered, "I roamed every trail, believing I'd never stop. But now I know my journey ends here, in this bakery, with you." Her eyes glistened as she answered, "And I know now, Samuel, I will never be alone again." With laughter echoing, with the warm smell of bread in the air, a family was born. No grandeur was needed, only two hearts that had found each other. 5 years had passed since the fire consumed the old bakery. Silver Waiter Creek had grown and changed, yet the place tied to their story still stood bright. The bakery eatery with a wooden sign carved Whitaker and Prescott's Loaf and Ladle. The sign was plain, honey-colored wood with black lettering hanging above polished glass. To the townsfolk, the name was no longer two separate families, but the mark of a bond, of love rebuilt from ashes. Inside, warmth and life hummed. The bell chimed each time the door swung open, mingling with the scent of fresh loaves, simmering stew, and the rise of laughter. Hannah, now every inch a mistress of her trade, still wore her white apron as her hands moved quick and sure, setting golden bread on the counter. Behind her stood Samuel, broad-shouldered, steady, slicing loaves, pouring soup, greeting customers with that quiet, easy smile. A man once meant for saddle and trail now looked as if he had been born to stand behind this counter. At their feet tumbled a boy of 5, eyes amber like his mother's, hair unruly as his father's. Noah clutched a bun to his chest, flour smudging his cheeks as he laughed. "Noah, you've made a mess of the floor," Hannah chided, though her voice held no sting. The boy darted to Samuel's side, piping, "But Papa, I only wanted to see if the bread was good." Samuel swung him into his arms, turning him in the air until the boy's laughter rang through the shop. Watching them, Hannah's eyes blurred, because in this simple moment she saw that every hardship had been worth the cost. By noon, the crowd thinned. Hannah set down a plate of apple pie before Samuel, who sat with Noah scribbling flowery shapes on the table. "Do you remember the first day?" she asked softly. Samuel looked up, gray eyes lit by sunlight through the glass. His smile came slow but sure. "I remember. A worn-out cowboy, drawn in by the smell of bread, and who never walked away again." Hannah laughed, a tear slipping free. "I thought you were just a passing customer. I never knew you'd become my whole life." Samuel reached across, taking her hand, his grip firm but tender, the same way he had held her through every trial. The bakery had become more than a shop. It was the town's hearth. Old men came for tea and stayed to watch Hannah tease Samuel. Mothers brought children, saying, "This bread tastes like home." Strangers from other towns passed through, leaving with smiles and warm loaves in their hands. Folks began to whisper that Whitaker and Prescott's Loaf and Ladle was the very heart of Silver Waiter Creek. Hannah knew it was true. Had the fire not come, this heart might never have beat so strong. That evening, with Noah asleep in Samuel's arms, Hannah stood in the doorway, looking at the sun sinking gold over the street. She thought back to her first days, lonely hands dusted with flour, trembling as she counted change for a stranger, one small touch, and fate had turned. Samuel joined her, draping an arm over her shoulders. He bent close, voice low. "I thought I was buying bread that day, but what I really bought was your heart." Hannah leaned into him, whispering back, "And I thought I was selling a loaf, but what I received was a home." They stood in silence, watching the last light spread, listening to their boy's steady breath. No grand words were needed. They had survived what was hardest. Above them, the wooden sign, Whitaker and Prescott's, gleamed in the dusk, a promise carved into timber that their love had built not just a home, but a legacy. Samuel pressed a kiss into Hannah's hair, repeating the words that had become legend in town. "I came for bread, but I found a home." And friends, what do you think? Can love truly find us in the simplest of moments? Share your thoughts below. And if this story brought back a memory worth holding, please like, subscribe, and pass it along, so we can keep alive the spirit of these Wild West love stories.